Are you seeing my screen?
Perfect.
Yeah, it looks good, Dan.
How about now?
Perfect.
All right, good deal.
And I'm going to mute.
Slides? Yep.
I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to show a handout, and then I have.
Okay, I'll stop. It's all you if you want it.
Okay. Why don't we start like this, and then I'll go into sharing my screen.
Yep, that sounds good.
Okay.
Okay, I'm clicking on broadcast now. Hi, it's Ted Ritzer, host of the Greening Government webinar speaker series, and I'm joined with colleague Wendy Oppers as panelists. And today we're very fortunate to have two different speakers from Extension.org and the Climate Learning Network. It's a U.S. national extension network. We're joined by Dr. Christine Geith, who is the executive director of that initiative, and Mr. Daniel Geller. And our format, as always, just to make sure that people understand who the other partners in our venture here, we're delivering on behalf of Alberta Environment and Parks, also the newly created Alberta Climate Change Office, and our municipal partner, the Municipal Climate Change Action Center, which represents all of the cities in Alberta. So we're very fortunate to be joined today with Extension.org with Christine and Daniel with the Climate Learning Network. And I guess without further ado, I'll turn it over to Christine. Our format will be 40 minutes of presentation, followed up by 20 minutes of Q&A. And Christine, I'll let you take it away.
Great, thank you, Ted. I'm glad to be joining you. Thanks for the invitation to be on this broadcast. And I'm glad to be here with Dan, who can really share the details of what his network's doing. Ted, you thought it would be really useful for me to share some of the context about cooperative extension and what that system looks like in the United States, because it's different in Canada and in Alberta. So there are 76 land-grant institutions across the United States. Let me share my screen because I have a little bit of a handout here. And there, if you can see my screen, it just tells you about it. If you go to extension.org, right on the main page, there's a link to this flyer. It's just 2 pages. But there are 76 land-grant universities that were created just over 100 years ago when the United States was recovering from the Civil War. And there was an act called the Morrill Act that said, you know, we have universities, but we don't have universities that will help farmers, of which was just about everybody in our population at that time. We need to create engineers and research and farming best practices to really create a green revolution in the country and build the economy, and that's what they did through land grants. And so every land grant still has today a cooperative extension service. It's usually in the College of Agriculture, but that's changing in some places like Oregon and Colorado. It's not just agriculture anymore. It's actually, in some cases, part of a university's outreach, engagement, or service arm, or continuing education even. So it's not just the College of Ag anymore, although in most cases it still is about 80%, even higher than that. So there are 76 institutions. They are in 5 regions, 4 geographic regions, and the reason for this is the similarity of needs and also governance of the system. These institutions receive some federal money. It's called capacity funding from the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they also receive state money. And they actually, in most cases, they receive more state money than federal, but it's multiple funding sources. They also get funding from their counties in the state. If they don't get funding directly, they get staff time. That's for a lot of the county agents are funded directly by cities or counties, or they get facilities. They were provided, you know, classroom facilities and research facilities in some cases. So every state is a little bit different. Every region has certain similarities and differences. So we have the Western region, we have the North Central region, which is where Michigan is. We have the Southern region, which is where Dan is. We have the Northeast region, and then we have an interesting region called the 1890s, and they're mostly in the South. These are the 19 institutions that were created in a similar act in 1890. So 1864 created the first land grant wave, and then in 1890 they created 19 more, 18, and another one's added later. And these are the African American institutions that specialize in the needs of that population. And agriculture-wise, they focus on smallholder agriculture. and livestock. They focus on the issues pertinent in their regions. And they also partner with the usually larger land-grant university in their state as well. So sometimes, like in Alabama, it's a shared cooperative extension system that both universities help fund and support and provide staffing for. Most cooperative extension services are made up of people in the field that we usually are called educators or agents. They usually have specialty areas like food and consumer sciences, doing nutrition consulting, or they might be doing natural resources like Dan has been doing with his group. They do food systems work and climate work and oh my God, so many different things. They work with all the commodities, all the agriculture groups, and any food, nutrition, community and economic development in rural and urban areas is really the purview of cooperative extension. And they have these 5 regions, and then they have a national governance group called ECOP. And this flyer I'm showing you actually comes from them. I wanted to show it because it gives you an idea of the areas that extension works in. There's a little summary here with a logo of USDA, since nationally we're representing their interests as well as the interests of states and especially counties. And then our group, eXtension, which is at eXtension.org, was created about a decade ago when, if you remember a decade ago, people still had, these things didn't exist about a decade ago, right? Facebook was still new. Even Wikipedia was still, kind of getting started. Google was just a search engine, compared to what it is now. And the Cooperative Extension at that time said, we need a way to get our research-based information, because we're at Landgrant Universities, because the idea is to transfer research knowledge into practice in local communities and to close that loop and, bring the local needs back into universities to do more research. So that's the basis of the system, is research-based knowledge and helping people make smarter choices. So they said, you know what, we need our research-based information. We need our own Wikipedia, we need our own Facebook, we need our own Google, we need to get our information out there. So that's how we were created a decade ago, eXtension. And about 3 years ago, the system said, that was a good idea then, but things have changed dramatically with technology, and our states have the capacity now to have digital content and to create online courses and things like that, but we still need a group to really help us innovate in our practice of cooperative extension through professional development and through an innovation lab. And this is where, we come in. And if you can see some of the goals of the national group during this last year, they're focusing on resource mobilization, urban programming, which is a really growing area since most people are not farmers anymore here. They are in urban areas. So there's lots of urban programming going on, lots of youth programming going on. You see innovation is a big theme. And this idea of acting as a national system, especially for emerging issues. There's a new one that's being worked on. It's currently called civil discourse, and you can imagine why we're doing that with the 10% increase in violence over the last year. And you've heard in Canada about all the shootings. Well, actually, extension people on the ground, in urban and rural settings, they also come from sociology areas. We have rural development centers and others that are doing conversations and facilitating conversation, have programs around that issue. There are other emerging issues too, like the Zika virus, for example, or things that affect crops that make their way across the country. Those are all things that Cooperative Extension Services here work on. And our role in the system, just to share a different screen here, our role in the system is really this. This is our purpose. We help cooperative extension professionals make a visible and measurable impact on those local issues. We use technology, but we're not limited to that. We bring 3 things to the table. We bring a focus on innovation through an innovation lab, and we fund fellows. We get money from USDA NIFA through a grant to help fund those fellows. We also use membership funds, the 76 institutions. About 80% of those are actually members of our organization. eXtension.org is a foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit in the US, so they're members of that, but we also have services for non-members. But there's an innovation lab where we're helping institutions incubate and discover new practices, and then we help them spread those around. We focus on adoption. And we do that through what we call issue response here on the left-hand side, and that's really our word for professional development. Professional development is kind of a static notion, right? You get trained and then you put into practice later. And we're interested in new ways of incorporating learning and doing at the same time, right? So you're out in the field, you have access to your device, and you need to have an answer right away. So we have tools like Ask an Expert, we have digital content, we use tools like Zoom so that people can have collaborative workspaces to share with their constituencies and also with their peers across the country. If you go to extension.org, you'll see there are about 70 communities of practice that we have been supporting for the last decade and continue to support them in specialty areas like livestock, and climate's one of them. That's what Dan's going to talk about. And you'll see, pollinators and bee health and youth development, a whole range of things. And we've provided that publishing infrastructure for public-facing content. We've also provided tools behind the scenes for their collaboration. And then we've got a widget called Ask an Expert, which is a digital Q&A. There's live people behind there, but you'll see a frequently asked question database that's really used. All those are part of what we call issue response. We also have a webinar listing service, and we provide Zoom for the system for those institutions that don't have it, that are members, so that they can have more digital conversations, but they can also do broadcasts like this and do formal webinars, in larger rooms. So we provide support of that nature. And we also have what we call a new format. It's a blended format called the Core, where we've taken the best of face-to-face meetings where they happen at conferences, let's say, with the best of kind of these entrepreneurial, if you've ever been to a hackathon or an unconference, we've taken the best of those sort of design models, those design thinking models, and we're applying them to extension programming. So we invite research specialists that have shared appointments back at the land-grant institutions. We invite the people that are working in extension as program designers and evaluators, and especially the people that are in the field as educators and agents. We bring them together for a boot camp experience with key informants, and Dan served as one of those key informants, so that they can really improve and accelerate their ability to create that local, visible, and measurable impact with their projects. And that's a model we experimented with last year, and we're going to be doing a lot more of these events. So that the event is the catalyst that brings it all together. But before, during, and after, we have Zoom conversations for consulting, we have webinars, we have digital resources and archived instruction, so that this is becoming a different kind of a model to do professional development for our peers across the country in cooperative extension. And then those tools, of course, make their way out into the public as well. Also in this orange circle and issue response, we have competency-based capacity we've built over the past year, which is kind of you guys have been doing a lot in Canada and in Europe, especially for vocational training and workforce training, where you have structures of certification or job roles, and you're able to deliver what resources and learning experience, and you can track your own progress towards a set of knowledge, skills, and abilities for, let's say, job role, or it could be used as programming for your public as well. So that's a capacity we're bringing to Cooperative Extension for the first time this year. So we're focusing on the innovation sandbox of the lab, we're focusing on professional development, and then we have the National Cooperative Extension Presence, which is what you see on extension.org, with all those specialty areas of practice, which we call communities of practice, which are still growing, usually through grants. They get a grant from USDA, and part of their dissemination is through extension.org. It doesn't mean they necessarily use all of our web tools, but we can also be supporting them behind the scenes. And that's what we're doing with Dan. Dan's Climate Learning Network is one of those communities that we support. We're supporting them in new ways, and hopefully he'll talk a little bit about that. But I'm really happy that Dan's here to share, really targeted information, the details of how they're working and how we support them. But think of us as eXtension as a big network that's bringing new digital practices and tools. We are a virtual organization, so I think we're going to start calling ourselves a green organization, because everybody works from home, about 20 people. We use Zoom all the time for hours on end. We use Google Apps for collaborating. We use Basecamp. We use Slack. We're trying to get out of email, and we're trying to use Slack for our daily communication and keeping track of things. And it's quite a challenge to be 100% virtual, but it works. Excuse me, it works. It's fun. And what I'm going to do is turn this over to Dan now that I've provided the context, and he can drill right down into his specialty area and share some of the great work that they're doing. So thank you, Ted, and over to you, Dan. I'll stop.
Thank you. I'm going to get my PowerPoint up here and get things going. All right. You seeing it? All right. So one of these networks that Christine was talking about is the Climate Learning Network. We're pretty new. We started in 2015. A lot of these communities of practice that are existing on eXtension have been around for quite some time, so we're sort of the new kid on the block. There actually was there is a forestry climate COP that exists that we're merging with right now. So we're taking some of that existing material and merging it with the Climate Learning Network. That's focused on forestry. We focus on both agriculture and forestry. To give a little background about where we're coming from, our United States Department of Agriculture about 3 years ago created 7 climate hubs and 3 sub-hubs, which are now all considered climate hubs. You can see them on this map. And these are based out of that Landgrant University system that Christine was talking about earlier. And what we're trying to do is take that research that they're creating at the Landgrant Universities and get that out to the people. And this is specifically on climate and climate change. So there's a lot of great research going on, but getting that translating to the ground has been difficult. The goal of the USDA concerned with climate is to increase productivity in the face of climate change. So we have a pretty big order in front of us. You know, not only are we supposed to maintain productivity, but they would actually like to see us increasing productivity because we have less land and farms and we have more people all the time that need food. So we're trying to get that working. Our purpose is to create a network of climate literate extension agents. So we talked about the United States Extension System, which is really based on that agent that's on the ground. Our states are divided into counties, and what the ideal situation is that we have an agent in every county. We're sort of working back towards that. We lost a lot of those agents in 2008 when the economy crashed. So we're building that capacity back up. One way we're doing that is electronically, and that's where networks like the Learning Network come into play. We're also trying to provide a national forum for those climate hubs and extension to connect. So we're not trying to recreate anything that already exists. What we're trying to do is help those climate hubs to connect with extension, sort of fill in the gaps that they're creating and that we're identifying through our needs assessments and other tools that we use to figure out what's needed. And again, our audience is extension agents, and we're also focusing on other agriculture and forestry professionals. So we're looking at crop advisors, professional foresters, anybody that's on the ground talking to the farmers or foresters. We want to get a hold of them. And really the goal here is to help them incorporate climate change and climate change concerns into their programming. So when they're out on the ground talking to foresters or farmers, they're not going and saying, hey, let's talk about climate change. They're talking about their normal day-to-day activities, but they're thinking about how climate might affect those, and it helps them make proper decisions when it comes to climate change. So our approach is to identify tools and materials that are already out there and get those to the extension audience. So a lot of what we do is cataloging existing tools and sort of tailoring them to our extension audience. We have a pretty great communications team that we work with, so we're using a lot of social media to get that done. And again, we're trying to create this network of agents. We have some agents that are much more interested in this topic, and the hope is that they can share what they know with the other agents on the ground. So sort of learn from your peers and sort of sneak it in for those that aren't that excited about the topic, get people thinking about it, and again, incorporating it into their day-to-day training and education for farmers. So far, we've been working on developing a lot of content on our own. The primary source is e-learning modules, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We host a monthly webinar that's been very successful. Also talk about that. We use a green calculator to show how much carbon is saved doing this webinar as opposed to having everybody meet in person. We've been doing a lot of needs assessments, trying to figure out what exactly those agents need when it comes to climate change. And we also went to all the climate hubs that I talked about earlier and tried to find out what they need. How can we help them connect with that extension audience? We also have a monthly newsletter that has been well received. The big thing we're working on developing right now, and eXtension has been a great help in this, is developing climate literacy training. So that's the big goal for 2016, is to get that ready to launch in early 2017. So where are we? Again, we started in 2015. Right now we have our website up, that's climate-learning.net or climate-learning-network.net. We have 6 modules that are live that actually have continuing education units, which all of our extension agents need. So we're providing them with training that actually helps them meet their yearly training quota for the year, and we're also providing them with information about climate. And as I said earlier, we're actually merging with this Climate, Forest, and Woodlands COP, so we will have even more information available about the forestry side of the Climate Learning Network. What's next? So this started as a regional pilot project. So I'm in the Southeast. I'm at the University of Georgia in Athens, Georgia. And our initial charter was to work on the East Coast. So we were working with the Southeast Regional Climate Hub and the Northeast Regional Climate Hub. That went really well. And through time, we've added all the other regions that you saw on that map earlier to our purview. So now we are a national program, which is difficult because, as Christine said earlier, we have 74 land-grant universities, each with tens and hundreds of extension agents that we're trying to reach. So the way that we've been doing it, and I think this is one of those lessons that we've learned, is especially in the United States, we have a lot of people who don't want to talk about this topic. So what I've been targeting are those agents that are really interested in this. And I've been able to identify about 100 really interested agents that we are using in our first cohort for this climate literacy program that we're working on. So these are agents that work with climate change already. Some of them are climatologists. They know what they're talking about. This is something that they're very interested in. So we're using them to sort of vet the process, get their feedback. So we don't see them having any challenge in completing our climate literacy training, but what they're really doing is providing this feedback that's going to be crucial to developing this for an audience that might not be so receptive. And as you can see, the picture I have up is our first module. And in the United States, especially in the Southeast, this was the crucial module. And it's climate change communication. Talking to people that don't necessarily want to talk about this subject, get them talking about it in a way that they're comfortable with, and hopefully really convince them that this is something that they need to consider, especially if they're in the field growing our future food sources. I mean, this is a really important topic that has met with some resistance, and it's an interesting challenge. I come from the bioenergy sector, which was a similar sector. So at the beginning of bioenergy in the late 90s, we had a lot of excitement about it, and it sort of petered out near the end. And again, we were kind of working against the current. So I've been doing that my entire career, and I hope that I've developed some ways of making people comfortable talking about subjects that they're not so comfortable with. That communication module, again, it's communicating climate change impacts and options to a disbelieving audience. And those words in that title were chosen very specifically. It's taught by Dr. Steve McNulty, who's with the United States Forest Service. And he's very good at talking to very diverse audiences. He knows what the people on the ground are thinking. He's done a lot of field work in forests. And he has a really great way of talking to people that may not want to talk about this. And he calls it Elfland, which is kind of a, I guess, funny name, but it actually has some context here. So establish contact, listen, find commonality, lessen mistrust, assess needs, nurture ongoing projects, and the most important one is deliver. So what he's really trying to do is go into these communities and connect with the people, get their trust, and then start talking about these topics in ways that they can understand. And I think this is critical when we're communicating about climate change. It's just one of those topics that has a lot of, static surrounding it that we have to cut through. And really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do, again, is increase production on these working lands in the face of climate change. So our goal isn't trying to convince them that humans are responsible for all this change, even though, we think it is, and we have some good proof supporting that. It's really to get them to adapt and address the issues that they're facing on their farm. So it's delivering information to people that they need, not necessarily delivering all the information, but give them the information they need to help them be more productive. We're doing this through several steps, and this is where eXtension comes in. They've been providing us with great tools to make this happen. One of them is consensus-guided competency identification. And we did this using a program that they're designing with EduWorks, who is their education partner. And this was online. So we had an advisory board of about 8 people that met for 16 hours using Zoom. And it was grueling, but it worked. And we came out with these competencies that are outlining what we're trying to teach the agents. What do agents need to know about climate change, these extension agents, again, to get their job done. Let's make sure that they have the information they need to do their job right, and so they can talk about this intelligently in the field. Again, this is online, so we didn't use any fuel doing this. This was all done in the comfort of our offices and our home offices. The next step that we're working on right now is developing a new curation and tagging system that eXtension is helping us with, and EduWorks will be a part of that as well. So what we're trying to do is develop an online, lightweight, so not very big, very elegantly programmed app, if you will, to take outside content and tag it on an internal database and be able to reference, say, 3 minutes of a webinar that's crucial for extension agents to know about climate. So they don't have to sit through an hour and a half of preaching about climate change. They get to the meat about what's important for extension agents. So we're working on extracting that type of content, delivering it to agents in a way that they can use. So some of this will be geographically and contextually targeted. So it won't be everything that they could possibly have about climate change. It'll be what do they need to meet those competencies that we've already designed. The next step is curriculum design using instructional design expertise from eXtension. And this will help us design these lessons and then also, more importantly, design that evaluation to make sure that these agents are actually learning what we hope that they're learning in regards to those competencies. And the next thing is customized training. Again, this is using that framework that we've come up with, the tagging system that we're working on now, and really targeting this climate change information. So for example, a cotton farmer down here in Georgia does not need to know what the corn farmer in the Midwestern United States needs to know. So sort of taking all that extra information that's not going to help them get their job done, that's not going to increase productivity in their region, filtering that out and delivering it in a contextual and geographic targeted way, really cutting down on the bulk of the information that they need or that they're learning to really, again, help them do their job, communicate to their farmers how they can improve their productivity on their working lands and their foresters as well. And then finally, eXtension is working on a competency-based learning management system, an LMS. Some of you might know Moodle. This is a variation of that idea. And this is allowing tracking and mastery against those competencies. So this is an LMS that will actually follow those competencies and make sure that the agents are learning what they need to know and checking that back with the competencies that we've already designed. When we were talking before the webinar, we were talking about our climate science portal. So this is climatewebinars.net. Right now we have about 20 climate change webinars that the CLN has hosted up on this site. And one unique thing that we have on there is we have this green savings calculator. So it's something that our hosts were talking about implementing for their training and for their webinars, because as you can see, we only had 23 people at this webinar. This is a very recent webinar, but they've saved over $4,000 in travel costs because these people didn't have to fly in, and 4,000 pounds of CO2 simply because there was no travel required for this. And I think this ties in well. The people that are interested in climate science coming to these webinars. We also have portals for forestry and bioenergy. A lot of topics that we include this in this webinar ecosystem that has this calculator. It's an interesting thing to tack on to make you realize, okay, if we had gone to a conference and attended all these webinars, this is how much we would have spent, how much fuel we would have spent, how much CO2 we would have generated. It really is. These new tools are really great because we're cutting that down. We're making the delivery process more green, which really sets an example for what we're trying to achieve in making, for example, mitigation in terms of climate change. We're doing it. We're setting an example. This is a great way to illustrate that. And that's really all I have for the Climate Learning Network. Our social media is there. And again, climatelearning.net. That's where all of those modules are. They're free to take right now. They all have continuing education units associated with those if you need those. I would love it for you guys to go and try those out. Those 6 modules that are there will be incorporated into that climate literacy certification for extension agents. So that will be required curriculum for them. And again, then we'll bring in other targeted, curated materials that we've identified specifically for each instance of the training for the people that are doing it. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to our hosts.
Well, Christine and Daniel, that was wonderful. I mean, you guys are doing a lot of innovative things, and I think we want to open it up to our participants through the Q&A function. If you hover your mouse over the screen on the upper section of the webinar screen, you'll be able to post some questions. In the meantime, I just wanted to say that I thought that green savings calculator was just brilliant. I think that's wonderful. I'm sure that everybody in the audience there will want to try and emulate that or at least get some information on it. So if there's a way of kind of posting a URL, Daniel, in the side window, in the online chat window, or however we can kind of get that information to folks, I'll post it if you guys send me some information on that. So I haven't seen any questions come in just yet. Just open it up here. But what you guys are doing in terms of tagging the content, how is that going to work as far as within, for example, you've got YouTube's posted videos like we're doing. How are you going to have that indexing of that content? And you said you were working with a vendor at EduWorks.
So yeah, I'll start then, Chris, you can chime in on it as well. What we've done so far is it's real easy to get the start point on that content. So you can pull into a YouTube video anywhere you want in terms of starting. What we're having trouble with is the exit. And that's where EduWorks is coming in. So they're trying to figure out how to pull us out cleanly. So right now we have a curator named Brent Peterson who's starting to catalog all the materials. And we can tap in wherever we want. We're going to have to figure out a way through. So we're using Adobe Captivate to do our e-learning modules. And through that interface, we're playing with a couple different options to pull out at the correct time. So there's a challenge there. YouTube doesn't facilitate that. They want you to stick around as long as possible, right? I mean, they want you on their site. They want you to see that next ad when you're done with that video. And I think the way I'm beginning to realize they set things up is they want you to get to the end of that video. Because if you get to the end, there's always a commercial, right? So yeah, so we're gonna figure that out with EduWorks. There's ways around it using Java and some other tricks that will be behind the scenes.
Yeah, let me build on what Dan is saying. So when you saw a link, and maybe Dan can put it in the chat too, there's a link to the Climate Learning Network Competency Framework, which is, accessible statements. Yeah, I think it's useful for people to see that. It's accessible statements of knowledge, skills, and abilities. This comes out of things like if you're familiar with the DACUM process, if you're a program or instructional designer, that stands for designing a curriculum. And you basically do a job task analysis, and then say for that task, what do you have to know, what do you have to do, what are other characteristics, and then you can build rubrics, you can build tests, and exams or quizzes, you can build content around that. You can also index each of those statements, let's say put a number on each of them, 2.1a, 2. That kind of a thing. And in the past, I've done this for food safety certification. So you end up with hundreds of these things. It's totally unwieldy. But working with our partner, they're coming up with an open source tool. They already have one piece of the tool, but you create these open source indexes that can take the competency codes, each statement has a code, and you can then map that to job roles, you can map that to content, and you can map it to words that you could use as keywords. So when you're doing your, tagging your content in a system like YouTube, or if you've got a more robust system or like a library where you can actually manage your metadata, you can actually use controlled vocabulary if you want to, and ontology, so that these competency frameworks can be used like ontology search terms that you would use like in a research database. And we have a GODAN fellow that's going to be announced soon. GODAN stands for the Global Open Data for Ag and Nutrition. It's a G8 initiative. Started a couple years ago. USDA funds it. Also, I think I can't remember what the European group is that funds it. But they're all about creating data standards so that we can share data sets as well as research information more widely or more broadly. And we're interested in contributing to that conversation by bridging research terms and extension terms, right? Right now, these are kind of like different worlds. There's programs, which is different than research, but we want to bring these together. So when you're searching on climate, you can find both extension information, learning materials, and like the resources that Dan has shared today. You can also find the research behind it without having to go to a different place. So anyway, that's kind of a newer thing, and that'll be, the ins and outs of that will be fleshed out over the next few months. But it's all about tagging with keywords, or more robustly, the metadata for resources like pieces of videos in YouTube or whole videos, learning resources, PDFs, texts. I mean, it could be anything, any digital resource. So this is, Dan is showing the Climate Learning Network Competency Framework, and you see the big terms on the left, right? So if you're in this role as a climate literate extension professional, you're working on this top one, you should be able to integrate climate vulnerability concepts into agriculture systems. And that big task is defined by these smaller ones in green and blue, like apply exposure knowledge, relate climate vulnerability recommendations to client needs. All those statements were created in a Zoom webinar just like this over the course of several sessions, done virtually, which is a first. We've invented this process. We're trying to get it down to 10 to 12 hours if we can do that. But it's the biggest thing you can do. Yeah, I think you guys spent almost twice that because you were an early adopter, right? You're the second one that we ever did. But we're trying to get it down to 10 to 12 so that these things are really worth using for informal learning, you know, not just for job certifications, you know, because we can use these in so many different ways. So anyway, Dan, do you want to, this is a great example. Do you want to dive into this any further?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll talk more about the process because that's probably more interesting, really. So it was really well guided. I mean, we didn't just go in and say, okay, what are we going to do? Like, there were questions that were asked that led us to this. We didn't have to synthesize this. I mean, the EduWorks that we were working with had a really great process for bringing this out. We didn't really know what we were doing at first. We started answering questions. And as it starts filling in this spreadsheet, that this is linked to a spreadsheet that we created, you start to see this structure appear, and then you get done, and here it is. And it was, I think, a really satisfying thing for everybody involved. It was grueling, but we also really, I mean, it was a lot of people that knew each other, that it was like we were kind of hanging out, talking about something we love to talk about. So that really helped it go a little bit faster, or a little bit smoother, I guess. And there was, you know, there were some disagreements, and I think that's where the time comes in, Chris. If you get a group that's not going to disagree at all, it goes really fast. But there were a couple of these where we just did not see eye to eye, and we almost had a 50-50 split on the people that were in the room at the time. So that made it a little more challenging, but also made it a little more fun. So I don't know how you account for that in the actual timing. It's really the pacing that the facilitators did really was what got this done. If they hadn't been pushing us to get things done and they knew when to say, okay, enough arguing, we either need to move on or make a decision, I think that's really what it comes down to, is that facilitation. Yeah,
and this is also, I'm really glad you described the process. It's also a living document, right? And this, your field is so dynamic, and as you have more people in the field, you know, you're going to want to tweak this. So you can reconvene your group when it seems appropriate. You know, I don't know, it doesn't have to be annually or something, but to not have this sit on the shelf and not be a static thing, but be a dynamic reflection of the actual practice of cooperative extension professionals in this role is really what we're trying to lighten it up to do, and technology enables us to do that. And these are not like major system builds or something. They're really tools. So imagine this, and imagine a little index, and then you're in a database or tagging content. You can easily say, yeah, that this matches this, and you go down the list. That's the set of tools that's being created right now. And by January, we'll have, through eXtension, a Train the Trainer program so that more people can be trained to facilitate these conversations. One of our visions is that these frameworks will be ubiquitous, you know, across all kinds of different fields in cooperative extension, so that we can have more like power behind our programs, because you can track people's individual progress, or they can track it themselves. You can find gaps in knowledge, skills, and abilities that are more easily measured. Instead of just saying that, you know, you trained 80 people and they got an 80% on the quiz, or they all participated in the webinar, which is great, you still have that information. But now you can say, you know, by consensus, our group identified the top 10 skills, and, you know, we half the people that went through this program mastered these skills, and the other half, got proficient in these skills. And that's a much more impactful way to report out what you're doing in education, training, and in extension work. So anyway, we look forward to really rolling this out. And I got to thank Dan and his team for being the early adopters and helping figure it out. So thank you.
I think, the key word there also that you mentioned, I'm glad you did, is consensus. Like, this is built on consensus. This isn't me sitting around saying this is what I think is important. We did have people that disagreed, so we came out with a much, I think, more effective and refined set of competencies, as opposed to two people sitting down and knocking this out in an afternoon, right? I mean, this is something we fought about, we thought about, we came back and fought about it. It really is something we're proud of. And the ability to edit this is easy. This is a Google Doc database that generates this. I can change this in 2 seconds. I mean, I'm fairly tech savvy, but even if I wasn't, this would be a piece of cake to change. Our plan is to take that first 40 to 100 agents that we have lined up and get them to provide feedback really on this. So this is where we're going to go change it, and then changing what we link to it based on their feedback. So hopefully, all this stuff is open enough that you can really make these changes as you go along. And we're building something I think is going to be really great. It's slow because we're the first, but it's turning out really cool. So.
Well, the other things that you guys mentioned that I'm really fascinated with is the whole integration between sort of your Zoom system and a learning management system. Did you guys say that there was an integrated approach, sort of Moodle-like that you can use?
Oh, they're not. Yeah, they're not really. I think that was something. We use these at the same time, so multiple windows are open, right? So we use Zoom as our little conversation. While the conversations are happening in Zoom, we have another app like a Google Doc opened up that we're collaborating on, but we have this channel in Zoom for, keeping the communication open. So the sharing the screen, because Zoom makes it so easy to share screens, it's so helpful for collaboration, especially if you're using a collaborative tool. And when we do staff meetings, we have our agenda up in Google Docs. Everybody that wants to participate and take notes or add links or resources has that doc open on there in one window, and then they have the Zoom conversation going on in the other. And being able to archive it and then link those things, when we do our agenda, we link to the archive of the Zoom webinar. So there's a lot of different ways, but they're not integrated in the way that you described.
Mm-hmm. Now, Daniel, you had mentioned something that was sort of Moodle-like.
Yeah, so that's the LMS. And Chris, where are we on that LMS?
Well, Moodle has been upgraded. The source code's been updated. Our service provider in the next month or so is going to be rolling out that version 3.1. So we expect that to be in the next month. But the Moodle proper, if anyone else is using Moodle as their LMS, so you have the ability now to track competencies as part of the gradebook. And that's,
it's in LMS. It's in Moodle. I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, it's in Moodle. So their gradebook's been enhanced to track competencies. They've also added individual learning plans to Moodle, which helps you track people's progress. In addition to that, we also use a product called IntelliBoard, which provides another layer of reporting that's really useful, because Moodle doesn't have everything you want in it, but sure goes a long way. So we're creating some custom reports with IntelliBoard to kind of put the icing on the cake there and put a nice little wrapper around everything. So that's the kind of capability. These are not things we built. The things that are being built that are kind of custom tools are really these open source sort of widget-like things that make the job easier and help glue things together better. But it's great to see Moodle as an open source, learning management system embracing this functionality. It just shows how mainstream it's becoming. And this isn't your grandmother's, 1970 competency-based stuff, right? It's based on those principles of workforce development. Competencies aren't new, but being able to do them and use them in this robust way to really provide some power to learning experiences that's trackable and reportable, because your funders want to know, what did you do? You got to report back to the federal government, the USDA, and I think this gives us the kind of information that we need. And more importantly, it frees up learning so that that's not all about the expert using this. It is a self-learner, or somebody's trying to roll their own portfolio. It's equally useful for creating your own resume and portfolio of experience and your own personal learning plans, whether or not somebody is giving you a certification or a badge or a CEU. And then bridging it with research, I think I'm really interested to see how that happens, but that's a little farther away.
Well, this is, what I get from this, and that I think that we want to emulate, is you're really walking the talk. I mean, the talk as far as, carbon footprint reduction, that's exactly what part of this speaker series is all about, as well as growing a green economy. And I think what you guys are presenting a wonderful national model for not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. I mean, and your green savings calculator, like I said, I think that's just brilliant. And the weird thing with this kind of stuff, and we were talking, like Wendy Oppers and I have never met in the 6 years of collaboration. So this really does, the workplace, maybe it's not so much place-based anymore. Work can take place, collaboration can take place with people literally from around the globe using technology like you guys are really leading the charge on, and you can reduce the carbon footprint of collaboration. I mean, I think what we're getting at with models like yours, Christine and Daniel, is what I would call an internet scale response to climate change, where through collaboration you can come up with things that help reduce the carbon footprint and grow a green economy. Like you're making, comments about helping that as well. I mean, the whole rural-urban mix in terms of a green economy. I think you've got a wonderful system here.
Wow, thank you. I love the words that you use to describe it. I think we're going to start playing that up more at eXtension.
Yeah. One thing I think that's interesting to note, when we're working with extension agents, these are people that really want to know who they're talking to. So there is this, what I've found, and I've been doing extension on a state level in the state of Georgia for 10 years. And now suddenly I'm working in this national project trying to connect with thousands of extension agents. And I will say, no matter what, when I go meet them at a conference in person, when I come back, that connection is much stronger. I don't know how we replace that, because especially in this is a very trust-driven, little group of people we're working with. And they know me as the guy who runs the Climate Learning Network, but until I go shake their hand and, talk to them at a conference or hang out with them for dinner or something, that trust isn't there, right? So that's our next step, Christine. How do we get that trust going online?
Right. And I've been doing this kind of work since 1989, and there's a lot of replacements for doing work and collaborating. You can build fantastic relationships online, and a lot of people get married for online dating, right? At least in the U.S. So it is possible to build those relationships, but it's done in a different way, and it sure accelerates things if you can build a trust relationship face to face. And then all these great collaborative tools just build off that great relationship. But yeah, there are people studying that trust network. I don't know, I haven't, in my time doing it, I haven't found a great replacement for face to face, which is why we do the core. These core events are face to face events, and it's costly, right, to bring people together, do the travel, not to mention the carbon footprint of an event. But it's our human nature, I think, to want to be with each other. But if we can make those times together as productive as possible, going to a conference to sit and listen to something is semi-valuable, but it's the networking in between, right, that where you really get the value. So
Absolutely.
why can't the whole thing be networking? So when we had this group meet last week, the National Leadership Group for Cooperative Extension, they used Poll Everywhere to really maximize their time together to talk about the issues in a short format, lightning round, and then they used Poll Everywhere to get people's feedback, and then the next day those were turned into motions that they voted on. And working that way inspired them all to say, do we need to meet as often? Could we do some of this, we could still meet, but does it have to be for 3 days? Does it have to be 3 times a year? So I think it opens up ideas for people. Building that trust, though, as Dan says, that's really important, especially if you're launching something new, or you're trying to get people to adopt a new behavior. It just doesn't work as well unless you have some sort of bonding social experience with people.
This is really a sales position, this climate change thing. You know, like, I mean, I'm going to people, talking to them about something they don't know they need, nor do they sometimes want what they need. So it is sales. And really, you know, once I get that initial contact down, like that list of people who are involved, I've met all of them once, and that's it. You know, now we're good. I think, you know, the sales pitch has been made and they're part of the team, but making that first point of contact, like, I guess maybe we need to steal something from sales. Maybe there's something out there we can rip off, right?
Well, one of the last questions that I'll pose, that I noticed somewhere in your material, you had mentioned that you were going to try sort of a Ignite-like sort of 5-minute quick presentations. Have you guys tried that?
Dan, have you tried that in your work so far?
We haven't done that yet. You have, though.
Yeah, we at our conference that we did in March last year in San Antonio, we had a speaker telling people, you know, not telling, but sharing how to do Ignite presentations. And the head of ECOP, Michelle Rogers, adopted that when she stood up at the podium last year and was giving her talk. She used, you know, she did an Ignite style presentation, lightning round, as another people call it, lightning presentation. You know, no more than 5 minutes, a lot of graphics. And this year at that leadership meeting I just mentioned last week, instead of taking a lot of time to share the results of a year's worth of committee work, they were limited to 5 minutes in that Ignite style talk. And Mark Locklear on our team, who supports our webinars on Zoom, provided, you know, guidelines and feedback, and he provided a little bit of technical support so that folks could do that. And, you know, it takes a lot of work to practice and synchronize and, you know, rethink what you're doing so it fits in that and it's synchronized with your slides, and you end in 5 minutes, and you're not just doing a fire hose, talking really fast, you know. And the 4 people who did it, they were all directors and administrators, you know, senior people. They did a great job, fantastic. They really liked that format. And when they asked if they wanted to do it again next year for more people, like, first of all, would these guys do it again because it was so much work? They all said they would. And then other people said, yeah, I would try that too, even though it's extra work than just standing up off the cuff and giving half an hour. That preciseness of the messaging and the ability also to record it, which we didn't do last week, but to record it like you are, to create an asset that can be used later where the story is nice and short. I think it's worth the extra effort. Having ways to make that easier. PowerPoint might not be the best tool for that, you know, but people like that format. But again, it's kind of, they'll do it if their friends do it, all right? You got to do kind of a sales job, like Dan said, right?
Well, Daniel and Christine, this presentation has been wonderful. I hope this is the start of sort of a ongoing collaboration between our respective you know, initiatives, because I think what you're doing at a national level is wonderful, and even better that it's digital carbon free. So thanks so much for doing this. It's been great, and I'll send you some information on what I heard Zoom is up to, as I promised.
Yeah,
right,
thank you. Dan, thank you for sharing your great work. You guys have done a lot in the last year. Congratulations.
Thank you. It's fun talking with you.
Yeah. Thanks for having us, Ted.
Thanks
Bye,
so
Wendy.
much.
Thank you.
Bye now.